Well, hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions, here with not an uncut review, because there could very well be some edits here. But my review of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, the London West End Theatre production. As I record this, when this goes up, I will already be back in the US, but as I record this, my wife Holly and I are in a trip in the UK, and one thing we put in our schedule was seeing this play, which we learned this particular production is the only place you can get the full extended version that runs a total of about 5 hours long. It's split into two parts, and those two parts are separated by, a 2.5 hour break for dinner. You leave and come back to the theater. And each part in itself also has one intermission. So it's about an hour and 15 minutes and then intermission. And then the second half of part one. Then you take the longer dinner break and so on and so forth. So I should kind of give a little bit of background on specifically where I'm coming from on this, because I think that my review is going to probably not line up with many other people's experiences. And I should also say this is a really weird review for me to do to begin with, because I don't review live theatrical plays. That's not what my content is about. But in this circumstance, and since it is, a somewhat rare form of geek genre in live theater, I thought, well, okay, I might as well say something about this. People are probably going to ask me at some point anyway. Maybe not many people, but enough that I'll want to record my thoughts. Anyway, I have acting very much in my background. In high school, that was like my main thing that I was involved in. And not as much in college, but in my early 20s, I was also involved in several theater productions, playing often the kind of like the lead role. And so it was really, it was a life that I was invested in. But what I discovered at some point was that although I enjoyed being in theatrical productions, I don't enjoy watching live theater. I much prefer recorded mediums of storytelling, such as film, and as I came to produce a number of over the years, audio dramas, because there's a lot more opportunity for subtlety in performance and to really get the best that every actor can bring to the table, and to polish it up in post-production, and really just have a lot more control over the nature of each scene and performance, as well as the quality of each scene and performance. It's just wildly different when you're talking about a recorded form of storytelling versus live theater. So I come into this not really being a fan of watching live theater. So I think that's really important for me to say at the front, because generally I didn't love this experience. I'll say, well, I'll get to the kind of like the whys and what I did like about it. There was definitely some things I really did like and appreciate about it, and I'll get to that, I guess, in a little bit. First off, for those who are unfamiliar with this is written by J.K. Rowling. She might have had an editor or some people involved in helping her to write in this format, because it's not it's not based on an original novel of hers. She just wrote the stage play and did publish it in book form, but that was simultaneous with or after it was a play done in London, and I think maybe in I think it's also in Broadway and other main stages. I don't know if it's touring. But anyway, so it's a different animal in terms of what she's written in the past, and all we presumably have to go on. I haven't read the script myself, even though it's been published. I think we have a copy of it somewhere in our house. But you're not going to get the subtext. You're not going to get the internal emotional dialogue going on in the minds of characters that you are going to get in one of her books. So it's just a very, very different animal. The basic story is it takes place when the main characters from the books and movies are grown up and in their 40s, maybe just turned 40 or early 40s, and they have kids that are now going to Hogwarts. And at the beginning of the show. It kind of picks up where the last movie left off. That's my frame of reference. I did read books 3 and onward, but my memory of those isn't as strong as of the movies. So my main reference is the movies. But it picks up right kind of where the last movie left off, with the grown parents dropping their kids off at the train station to go to their first year at Hogwarts. But it really fast forwards through the first 2 or 3 years, and just establishes some relational connections, like Albus Severus Potter, who is Harry and Ginny's son, and how he ends up becoming friends with the son of Draco Malfoy, whose name is Scorpius, which already caught my attention because I'm a huge Farscape fan. But anyway, they end up becoming kind of unlikely friends, and a significant through line of the story, not the main story, not the source of the ultimate dramatic tension, but the main B story, is the relationship between these two characters and how it develops over time. And but the main story is the realization, there's murmurings of this cursed child, the possibility that that Voldemort had a child that was going to rise and bring darkness to the world. And so they're trying to figure out who this child could be, this pseudo-illegitimate child of Voldemort. And I won't kind of give away the story if you're not familiar with it, but basically that's what it all revolves around. And eventually it, in some ways, functions as a Christmas special for a long-running TV series or something similar to that, where it doesn't really add to the main story of what came before, but rather it is its own self-contained story with a lot of callbacks that fans will appreciate to the main story that came before. And one of the ways that they accomplish that in this story is introducing time travel, and quite a bit of it, and far-flung time travel, into the histories of the characters from the original books and movies and stuff. And so, anyway, there's various twists and turns and stuff like that, and as the story itself goes, I didn't find it very interesting. I didn't find that it had a really satisfying climax. Actually, I felt that, and my wife felt the same way, that at the end of the first act was the strongest moment, because it introduced these creatures, I won't say more than that were really a spectacle to see on the stage, and how they created them, creatures we've seen in the movies. And it was just fantastic the way that they brought them to tangible life, just like a few yards away from you in the theater. And that was the most spectacular and, I think, tense moment, where the sense of danger and, oh my gosh, the world has gone to crap kind of moment, the lowest point in terms of dramatic tension of the type that we're used to in these stories, happened, I think, at the end of Act 1, and was resolved really quickly, I thought, at the beginning of Act 2, where I thought Act 2 was going to be playing out the premise that Act 1 ended with, and that just wasn't how it worked out. I may not be right in dividing these two halves up in Act 1. I should say Part 1 and Part 2. They probably have different divisions as far as acts. They may have as many as 5 to 7 acts in the script. Who knows? But anyway, the climax at the end of Part 1, I felt like was the high point. And we just didn't get to see that dark world that had been brought about really play out the way that I wanted it to see it play out in the second half. I think that a lot of the story was written for the stage, in that it was the story and dialogue that was propelling it more often than spectacle or conceptual whimsy, like the different creatures that the kids would see and the different silly spells that would have various side effects. There's definitely a good chunk of that. There's a lot of that going on, actually, and it's impressive how they pulled it off. I'll comment on that hopefully in a little bit here, but the story itself I found a bit unfocused, and I can understand why the U.S. versions and other versions maybe condense things down a little bit. I think that it was way longer than it needed to be. And I think that having the focus at the climax be one that is character-driven and meant to be emotional, instead of really like, oh my gosh, here's this big spectacle battle or whatever, like is often the case in the movies. Instead, they were going for like a heart-wrenching kind of climax, that would be kind of cathartic and bittersweet for fans of the franchise, and so I saw them going for that, but I wasn't feeling it because of I think the performance style, which I should really comment on. When you are dealing with stage acting, you're dealing with just a type of presentation that's more grand and with bigger gestures and almost a kind of choreographed movement to the way that people present themselves, and they are going to inflect a little bit differently. It'll almost have a musical quality to it. It just is a little less natural. Everyone is projecting their voices just a bit, even though they have microphones. They are not solely relying on them in the way that movies would allow characters to really just mutter and just speak really intimately. You can't do that in most stage productions. It can be done, but in most they're not going to do it. And this one, they weren't going to go that route, apparently. So you just, and the pacing, there was very little downtime or beats or silences between lines. They were often right on top of each other. My gosh. And again, this was still 5 hours long. So there was just kind of things about the performance style, the pacing style, the presentation style that weren't working for me, that in addition to the story not connecting with me, didn't help matters at all. I should also say that there were some conceptual things being done to present different ideas that were kind of artsy things. Like, for example, in one scene, they're visiting a graveyard, but instead of having gravestones that they're looking at, it's all suitcases, which is kind of based on the motif established at the beginning when they're dropping them off at the train station. There's suitcases all over the place and stuff. And so there's these abstract kind of presentations of ideas or things that they're symbolically evoking or something like that. And that's not like exclusively how they present the set and locations and stuff. In fact, there's a lot of really cool looking backdrops and sets and props, but they still had these abstract things in there that I was like, this is, I get that it's kind of artsy and you're doing something there, but I'm not really feeling it. I really wanted to see what a live show could do when it really just threw a ton of money at something. And I thought, if it's Harry Potter, that's a show that's going to get the crazy big budget treatment in its sets and stuff like that, far more than anything anywhere else. It certainly is, by stage standards, huge budget. But they're still doing some abstract things that I wasn't a big fan of. The music is done by Imogen Heap, I don't know. There's something very in the neighborhood of that name. And the style is, and I've heard that name of that composer before, I can't remember what else they've done, but the style was electronic and even kind of an 80s electronic kind of thing, and nothing like the score in the movies. And you might say, well, it's a stage play, they're doing their own thing. Well, at so many different opportunities, they were doing things that were borrowing from the movies specifically. They cast actors and had them perform in ways that were evoking very strongly characters from the movies and the way that those actors performed them. There were some exceptions, but in most cases, they were really leaning into that. So it was this inconsistent borrowing from the movies, and where I would have been like, let's go one way or the other. Give me the score that sounds like the John Williams and the other composers that used his themes and continued, making scores for the movies. Give me that kind of orchestral, whimsical kind of sound, but instead it's this kind of like moody electronic type of sound that I'm like, what is this? This does not feel like Harry Potter. It's very, very odd. And then also, I feel like the director of this show, or I don't know how uniform the different productions are, but whoever was responsible for this choice, I feel like they really wanted this to be a musical, because there would be these interstitial things, sometimes partially helping to transition scenes, but other times they were just there, taking up time, that I'm like, how about just give the dialogue a little room to breathe instead of giving us this dance number? And there'd be these kind of like short dance numbers that were kind of cool, but there's no songs. People aren't singing songs in this, and so I'm like, I don't get it. I don't get what you're going for here. As well as kind of like a pseudo narrator character they didn't quite commit to, that played the Sorting Hat and Hagrid and maybe a centaur at some point, and then also sometimes just a guy in a brown hat that would help transition scenes. I was like, he wasn't really functioning as a narrator, but by the way they were using him, I was like, is he supposed to be kind of like the breaking the third wall narrator, the host for the audience, as it were? There was just some artistic ideas that I felt like were not used consistently or weren't committed to enough, and so, like the script and the story itself, it felt unfocused, But here's what I gotta say. It was really cool to watch this for the visual effects, the practical effects. Those of you who have heard my reviews before know that I'm not a big fan of CG. I really prefer practical effects as often as possible. And it was like watching a magic show, like an illusionist, for 5 hours, but interrupted and built up to frequently with dialogue and stuff like that. So, but I mean, there's a lot of all kinds of effects with spells and people flying around and people transforming from one person into another, or one person into like a creature. Or were there any creatures? Well, yeah, maybe one pseudo creature transformation, but some really impressive tricks. Some of which I could guess how they were done, and others I was like, whoa, can I see that again? I have no idea how they did that, So some really neat use of lighting and wire work, and sometimes definitely not wire work, but I'm like, how are you doing that without wires? So on that level, and the costuming and stuff, those were just delightful and freaking impressive elements. I think what I would really prefer is an experience like this to be crystallized into a 20 to 40 minute experience, like the Waterworld stunt show at Universal Studios, if you know what I'm talking about, where it's all killer, no filler. Just give us the bare skeleton of a story. This wasn't a really interesting story to me to begin with, and I think just put all those cool stunts and visual effects and stuff into this awesome 40-minute spectacular. And I would have walked away like, holy cow, what did I just experience? But instead, I got something that really felt to me like it required way more time than I wanted to give it for the story and the experience that it was. I think that for hardcore Harry Potter fans, you probably already purchased the script and read it, and you know the story. And I think unless you're a big fan of specifically live theater, I don't even think Harry Potter fans that are not big fans of live theater need to see this. You can read the story and be up to speed on the continuity, because this is considered canon for the Harry Potter universe. And I think that you're going to live a plenty fulfilled life without ever seeing probably any version of this. As far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? Well, as sometimes happens, I felt a little bit like, I don't want to say tricked, but it's like, oh, okay, it's this story, where the main B plot is about two young teenage boys discovering that they have homosexual attractions for each other. And it starts out very subtle, and to the point where you could really interpret it as this really nice, developing, tender relationship with just a vulnerability and authenticity with each other. And I'm really bummed out when I see so often and so predictably that kind of characterization. I think every time I see it happen, that I can think of at the moment, I'm sure there's some exceptions, but it so often goes to, it turns out they're gay, or discovering that they're gay and coming out of the closet or whatever, and having a relationship. And I think it's so important that we as believers, and as men in particular, that we model and pursue relationships that have great depth and emotional vulnerability and intimacy, and model that for other believing men around us, or for our boys if we have sons, because there's something beautiful in that kind of vulnerability and authenticity of emotion between boys and men that is missing or seen as weak or frowned upon, and is just kind of swept into the category of gay relationships. And that's kind of always what that it only occurs in gay relationships. And that's a real shame that we're not celebrating. And you look at the life of King David and his best friend Jonathan, and just the depth of relationship they had and the emotion that they expressed with each other. You know, you read about them today, and I think a lot of people that are not believers or that are bringing their preconceptions into those stories, they're going to say, oh, I wonder if these guys were gay or bisexual or something like that. But no, they just had this depth of vulnerability with each other and emotional authenticity with each other that I think is so important for us to value and to not be afraid of, and to think is unmanly for us to have in our friendships with other men. There's also some stuff about following your heart, which, man, I'm like, wow, that still hasn't gone out of style. We're still bringing that one back, huh? Hollywood or J.K. Rowling, you know. Stuff about how, you know, Harry Potter, like his wife says, your heart is so pure. You know, he was like, I thought I was supposed to follow my heart, and it all went wrong and stuff like that or whatever. I'm not remembering it perfectly. And Ginny says, Harry, you have the purest and most beautiful heart of anyone. And when you made those choices, you were not following your heart. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? What do we even mean by following your heart? What was he following? His other heart, his liver, his kidneys, his brain? What are we saying here? I have no idea. And so I just want people to come out and just kind of define terms. Let's ask those questions. Well, what do you mean, follow your heart? Does that mean do what feels right in the moment? Does it mean follow your moral compass? Okay, that's a different thing. You know, what are we talking about here? So, you know, I think when those things come up, I want to be careful. I don't want to take on this mocking tone, because I think when we're in situations where that phrase comes up, especially with people who are not believers, I don't think we want to just mock and scoff. I think we want to sensitively engage in those moments. But I think we do need to ask the question, what do you mean by that when you talk about following your heart, you know? So anyway, a really interesting experience, very impressive experience in a number of ways. But not one that I would, you know, recommend to just anybody, or even just any Harry Potter fan. You know, definitely some mixed feelings about it. But it was an experience that I'm glad that we had the chance to have. Anyway, those are all my thoughts for now. As always, I hope that what do I always hope? I don't have my script with me. I'm on this vacation. Like, share, subscribe, click the something button or whatever. Give me your thoughts in the comments below, and keep sticking around, if you will, and explore more of what we're doing at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.
christiangeekcentral.com